That was fun. Montreal, rain. I mean, we weren't sure who was going to win till maybe the final 5 laps. We weren't sure who was going to podium till maybe the final 2 or 3 laps. Lots of overtakes. Good intra-team battle. Some wretched strategy. I thought that was good. Are you ready to go, son?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Hello. Welcome to Hard Compound, the American take on Formula One. We've just finished watching the Canadian Grand Prix. Race 9. There's still 15 to go. This is a long season. In Montreal, one of my favorite cities, French food, walkable streets, 2 of my favorite things. Patrick, son, what are your takeaways from the Montreal Grand Prix?
I mean, you said it. Race 9, it's a long season. Feels like we should be, at the very least nearing halfway, and we are not there yet. But this week in Formula One was a big one, I guess. Lots of stuff going on. The race itself completely delivered. Montreal, like you said, just an unbelievable city. I mean, the birthplace of, frankly, the greatest food in the world, poutine.
What? Poutine.
I'm sorry, you can't argue with it. Look, there's a lot of great food out there. I love all of it, but poutine has to top the charts. It's great. So Montreal's doing something right. And
I think you're
racing
right.
is just another thing that they have gotten right in that city. It's always a fun race, always a good time, usually unpredictable, and this race was no different with the weather. The teams were just sort of all over the place. We had Ferraris shit in the bed after a high in Monaco 2 weeks ago. We had Mercedes looking like they were going to potentially run away and steal the show this weekend. And they kind of did, but, didn't quite get on the top step of that podium after, what has been, frankly, an extremely poor start to the season as far as Mercedes is concerned. Just a full weekend, a full week in F1. Lots of fun, lots to discuss, I guess.
Yeah, this is one of those races where, because of the weather, it's been more fun for us fans watching on television. I mean, the whole weekend was great. Qualifying was great. The race was great. I like to focus first on the winner, then a 3 on the podium. But you touched on it. I think the big story this weekend was just the utter disaster that's Ferrari. Ferrari is in legit contention for the constructors. There's still 15 races to go. Leclerc, I don't think it will happen, but he's still in the race for driver championship. What an absolute disaster for Ferrari.
It's really quite shocking, I think, after Monaco 2 weeks ago, where obviously Leclerc got the win. Ferrari had a monster day and closed the gap right up to Red Bull. Something like, 30, 34 points separating Ferrari and Red Bull before this weekend. We were looking at this as, a fight, like you said, for the constructors. And it still could be, right? Long way to go in the season. But the way they performed this weekend was shocking. They had really no pace throughout the whole weekend. Qualifying was poor. Leclerc had a power unit issue basically from the start of the race. So he was down on power, losing a lot through the straights. The call to put on slicks did not go to plan. And he lost, I think, well over a minute just on the 2 laps that he was out there on slick tires, getting passed by the leader on something like lap 30 in a Ferrari.
Yeah, he was lapped. I mean, embarrassing. I know.
Wild.
Ferrari
And
lapped,
then,
yep.
Obviously, when you look at Sainz, he had similar issues, lack of pace, was sort of just stuck in the middle of the pack, and eventually just seemed to, I don't know, lose focus a little bit, lost the car, took out Albon, ruined his race.
Albon was having such a good
Yeah,
race
it's
too.
tough.
I mean, he squeaked through on, I think it was Haas, and I think it was Haas and Alpine.
Yeah, it was Ricciardo and Ocon, I think, that he split.
What an awesome move. He was having such a good race. Sainz just takes him out. Just a horrible weekend for Ferrari. I mean, and poor Charles, it's like lower C Catholic. It's sort of the more he sacrifices for the team, the more they punish him. It's just something weird. Yeah, just what a disastrous week for Ferrari. On the other hand, did not win, but what about Mercedes? Shockingly, their first podium of the year. 9 races in, they've not even been on the podium. They took third and fourth. Good battle between George and Lewis. You know, I think people say he made mistakes. George will say he made mistakes. Maybe his haters will say, "Oh, you know, he wilts under pressure." You know, because he did have pull. I just think George is a great driver, but he's not elite. He's not how Max is now. He's not how Lewis was back in the day. This is peak George. These aren't mistakes. This is him at his best.
Yeah, I think he's a very good driver. Absolutely deserving of a seat in F1. Deserving of a seat on one of the top teams. He just will never win a championship. He just makes mistakes sort of in critical situations, it seems like. I think this weekend, you know, he got pole. It's very fast. He really drove, I thought, a pretty solid race on that first stint, you know, where by the end of it, he was passed by Lando and Max. I just think the Mercedes seemed to eat through those tires a little bit quicker once it dried out, and he had a tough time keeping pace. I don't necessarily think that's entirely on him. I don't necessarily think that's really a mistake. I think later on in the race, you know, he got a little bit squirrely, went off a time or two. But look, whatever happened this weekend, it's not the best car on the grid. It's maybe not even a top 3 car on the grid. They showed really good pace this weekend. George got on the podium. He fought off his teammate Lewis Hamilton near the end there and almost got through on Lando to grab P2. Overall, a very good race for him, good race for Mercedes. There's really not much that you can do, I think, to take away from his weekend.
No, I agree. I think he's great. I'm just, you know, right now, Alonso's old. Lewis is old. You know, we've got Max. Max may be peerless right now, but Lando's right there, I think, close. But those are the 2 elites. Maybe we want to throw in Charles. I'm not sure. But I think George, you know, he can say he makes mistakes. His haters can say he wilts under the pressure. I just think he's just a rung below, you know, Max and Lando, for example, and maybe Charles. Though speaking of Max, another win. And this was a race where it demanded everything from the drivers. If there was going to be a race where you could take the win away from Max from Red Bull, this was the race, Montreal. Wet and dry conditions. He still came through. If you can't beat Max this race, you know, the season's not over. We still have 15 races, but, you know, that was something else. And maybe the haters have it wrong. You know, it's always been, oh, it's the car, the car, the car. Sergio is not worse than Logan Sargent. Sergio is not worse than K-Mag or Zhou, or I think Bottas, you know, or Ocon or Gasly. And he continues to flounder. I know the car is maybe not suited just for his preferences, but still. I mean, Max, another win. And you can't chalk it up to the car.
Yeah, I think he drove again unbelievably well. Just great stuff from Max, always. He's so consistent, even when the car maybe is not performing the way that he would like it to. I think this was a tough race for him, but also for the other drivers. Lando, I think, easily could have won that race if a few things broke his way. I think instead they kind of went Max's way. But both of them and George and even Lewis and Oscar were just so scrappy. They put in really good laps, held on to the car when they really needed to. It could have easily gone into the wall a few times. It was a lot of fun to watch. Max for sure showed his class in coming out on top, but the rest of them were right there. I think, this is just a good season. We're seeing a lot of competition, even for that top spot. Max is not running away with it in the way that he has the last couple of seasons. I think, he's still just a step above. And I still think the Red Bull is probably, in general, the quickest car on the grid, the most consistent, I guess I would say, across all circuits. But he is now consistently getting a run for his money. And that's just fun to watch.
It is. And this week aside, Ferrari throws everything they have at him, and it's close. McLaren looking really good. I mean, Oscar and Lando both week in, week out, putting in the work. George and now Lewis, Mercedes, looking good. So this has already been a fun season, and this could wind up being one of the best seasons we've seen in many years, outside of the 2021 P1, P2 battle. But for all the teams, all the cars, the drivers, this could be one of the great seasons. I mean, what a weekend for the Empire, for the old British Empire. I mean, look, what do we have? Lando, George, Lewis, Oscar, Daniel, Lance Stroll, all in the top 10. So the old British Empire, I thought, performed quite admirably in Montreal. Team or driver that did not perform admirably, Logan Sargent. I hate to say it, we've assumed he would be out at the end of the year. We have speculated that he would be out before the end of the year. What do you think? Should they just pull Logan and try something else? I'm not sure what he's going to bring to the team the rest of the year.
I don't see anything that would keep him on that team for the rest of the season. I think if you bring in a driver like a caretaker driver, it almost feel like you can't bring in a rookie. I think Logan's not going to score any points. He has not shown really that he can take care of the car, but I would be concerned to pull a driver in the middle of the season and put in just a rookie with no real experience and have the potential to sort of make those mistakes, I guess, that could lead to even worse issues for Williams. Honestly, I think bringing in a guy like a Mick Schumacher might do them good, but who's to say? I don't know. I think Logan should have driven his last race at the end of last season, but for some reason they decided to bring him back. I don't really know what James Foles is thinking there. He continues to be just so disappointing. And I've had enough of just like watching it. It's just so embarrassing most of the time. Although I will say one thing, a stat that I saw surprised me because Logan Sargent has been outqualified by his teammate Alex Albon in every single race that Logan Sargent has driven qualifying for. So he's 0-30 against his teammate. However, he has outqualified Sergio Perez 6 times during that span. Isn't that fucking insane?
Wow. Yes, that's almost, that might wipe out every good thing Sergio's ever done. I mean, qualifying is important, and he's in that Red Bull. He's only been in Red Bull since Logan Sargent's been in F1, right? 3 years. 3 years, right?
Last year was Logan's first year, right?
Right.
So Sergio's been at Red Bull a few extra years.
Yeah. So that's a shocking stat. So Logan Sargent, what is it again? He's out-qualified Sergio Perez 6 times.
Yeah.
He's got net 6 in qualifying against
Sergio Perez. He's like
that's
6
almost
and
unfathomable.
24, I guess, against Sergio.
Okay, but Sergio's in that. Okay,
but 0-30 against his own teammate. So You can
I see.
imagine
I
how many
see. So
times Alex Albon then has outqualified Sergio Perez. But what amounts to the worst car on the grid by a fair margin, at least in the time that Logan Sargent has been driving that car.
another person we assume will be out, Daniel Ricciardo. Unlike Logan, he had a pretty decent weekend. Very good qualifying and a fair race, which was nice to see. Even though, I'm one of those that sort of like, look, Daniel Ricciardo charm, it doesn't work if you're always losing races. I'm just not sure what he's bringing to that team.
Yeah, we've had this conversation before. Daniel Ricciardo, it's the same old story, right? Well, he drives for shit. It's bad. People get on his case, and then he has one decent weekend. And then everyone's like, oh my God, Daniel, he's back. He's so great, blah, blah, blah. And then he's going to go P17 for the next 4 races. And Yuki's going to score points in the next 4 races. And we're going to go, wow, Daniel, you've really dropped off. This is pretty tough to watch. And he's going to go, oh, look at me. I beat Yuki and I scored 5 points for the team this weekend. Aren't I great? It's just so consistent and so annoying. I'm sorry, Daniel, but I think it's run its course. Like, there's no reason for him to continue to be a driver taking up a seat in Formula One.
Yeah, Vettel had that drop off the last couple years, especially. But Ricciardo now has been bad more than he's been good. And it needs to be said. But do want to focus on positives. Alpine, P9, P10, they finally got some points. And, we've been saying we think they should distribute more points, at least through 12, the top 12. Haas came in, I think it was 11th and 12th, which under our point system, they have garnered some more points. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's good to see some of these teams that have been struggling have good weekends. I think certainly helped by the fact that there were, 5 retirements, 6 retirements, something like that in this race. So naturally, it increases your chances of scoring points. But still, Alpine looked at least competitive this weekend, especially in the rain, in the wet. They did good. Haas sort of brilliantly started on those full wet weather tires and made up a lot of ground. Unfortunately, the safety car came out a few laps too late for them to sort of hold those positions. But, they really battled. It's nice at least to see Haas be more or less competitive pretty consistently in that mid-pack group, trying to, scrap for a few extra points near the end of the race. But I don't know, that team, something needs to change or improve at that team. And obviously, I think the driver lineup next year is going to change. So hopefully we get to see some more competitiveness from that team in the following years.
Yeah, it was interesting and fun to see them, for example, with that tire strategy. Now, Ferrari did a tire strategy on Leclerc, but it's like, look, if your team rarely even gets points, it's fun to see them try a kind of a roll the dice strategy. Well, like you said, they started on wets. Ferrari did that with Leclerc, and it's like, look, he's fighting for wins. You're fighting for the constructors. You can't do a roll the dice strategy on the 9th race, whereas Haas can. They can't afford it. If they lose out completely. If they get points, it's awesome to see. All right, well, give me your top 5 for the Canadian Grand Prix, Patrick.
Top 5. I have a guy who we talked about earlier. I have George Russell as my driver of the weekend.
Wow.
I think he did great. I think people can say, the Mercedes looked the best in practice and qualifying, so George had the best car and he should have won from pole. You can say all that, but I don't think that's true, first of all. And second of all, he did a great job in a car that has been, not on the podium at any point this season and have been struggling just to get into the top 5 throughout this season. He got that car on the podium, looked extremely competitive, did a great job in qualifying and in the race. So I think he is the driver of the weekend. Then I have Lando in that McLaren. He's just so consistent. I think he is second only to Max in current form. Just another great weekend. Then I have Max, who just is so consistent. Every weekend gets the absolute most out of that car. He's pretty spicy, and I think he seems a lot more intense this season. And I think that has to do with the sort of closer competition. And I like to see that from him. I think he's, the last couple of seasons, I think, been racing against himself more than anything else. And I think it's good that we're kind of seeing competition against other drivers for him. And it seems like he sort of enjoys that competition a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I think he does seem to like that, when he has someone going up against him. And in all fairness, I mean, maybe safety car came out at just a slightly different time. Lando wins the race. It's possible.
Yeah, for sure. I have Lewis in the other Mercedes. I think he had a really good race, really good weekend. Not a particularly impressive qualifying performance from him, at least compared to George, but he sort of bided his time, got his tires into the best working window throughout the race. I think he really showed his experience and sort of driving savvy in this race, and ended up just so close to a podium, but still got some really good points for that team. And I think it must feel good for him to actually be competitive during a race. Seems like, he's just been sitting around in P7, like with nobody around him for most of the season. So he seemed to really enjoy this weekend too. And then lastly, the other old guy I have, Fernando Alonso. I think he was P6. Pretty good weekend for Aston, all things considered. And Alonso just looked like he was having a good time racing against Lewis, against his teammate, just sort of putting everything out there in the wet. It was good to see from him.
It was, Lewis is great at Montreal. Alonso's great in wet. I think, if memory serves, Alonso had that really bad pit stop, but it wasn't terrible. But the team did him no favors. But he probably finished as best as the car could. So that's a good. So George, I would have had it Lando, Max, George, Lewis, Alonso. But you have George Russell. Bit surprised to me, Lando, Max, Lewis, and Alonso. I mean, this is really shaping up to be a fun season. I mean, Red Bull, Max still looks like he's a bit above everyone else. Red Bull, a bit above everyone else. But it's not a given week to week. And you've got Lando and Oscar. What a great team. And then McLaren getting better. Charles and the Ferrari should compete for wins week in, week out, certainly for podiums. I mean, the team it was just an awful week for them. Mercedes, they've dug themselves a hole, but let's say it again. We think they've righted the ship. So a fourth car, but they can compete for podiums certainly now. I don't want to say Aston, but with Alonso there, he can at least fight for, top 5 week in, week out. So this is definitely a fun season. Who do you think then will have the most wins this year? And then who do you think will have the second most wins this year, Patrick?
Well, I think Red Bull and specifically Max will probably have the most wins this year. I think he's the most consistent and sort of likely to win each race. And then there's sort of 3 or 4 other drivers who can compete for wins pretty consistently. But it's very interesting how dynamic, I guess, each race weekend can be in terms of like who has the best shot to beat Max that weekend. It seems like the Red Bull can kind of ride through every circuit in a way that, is not the same, not a given for the other teams. But a lot of that also has to do with just how good Max is. I think Lando is right up there too. So, and the McLaren seems more consistent and competitive than the Ferrari and Mercedes? It's hard to say at this point, but I'm going to go with Lando Norris to have the second most wins this season, and McLaren in total will have more wins than Ferrari. I think Oscar will win this season at some point, at least once.
That would be great to get an Oscar Piastri win. All right, switching to the soft compound. A lot of driver news this past couple weeks, Patrick. A lot of big driver news. Ocon is out. Sergio Perez is in, back with Red Bull. Bit of a surprise. Yuki re-signs with Racing Bulls. Carlos Sainz still has not signed with someone, as far as we know, for next year. And the rumors suggest it will be Williams, which, man, going from Ferrari to Williams is going to be
brutal.
That's tough. That was like when was it
Kvyat and Gasly? Like F1 at that point, I think, Carlos, you can do better somewhere else. Come back when Audi joins.
That's going to be a tough one. I mean, you have to go from Ferrari to Williams. Can you make the case for Sergio Perez getting a 2-year contract?
Yeah, I think the case is Red Bull and Helmut Marko going, hey, Max, we have your back. I think that's it. That's the only thing. Like, it's just saying, we believe in you, Max, and we're going to set everything up for you, and you don't have to worry about us, the team, anything. You don't have to worry about your teammate. He will do exactly what we tell him to do. That's it. If they bring in a Carlos Sainz, if they bring in Yuki or somebody else, all of a sudden, Max is going, what the fuck? We had a good thing going. I was winning everything. Why do we need to change?
Yeah, no, you're true. Like I met this guy once, and his wife just had a baby, and they hired a nanny, and she was smoking hot. And I'm like, yeah, that's not good. You don't bring in a hot nanny when your wife just gave a baby. So that's kind of the closest I can the closest analog. Carlos Sainz would be like the hot nanny. Yeah, I mean, Sergio helps sell Red Bull. People like Sergio. He's great for branding and marketing. So I guess that's the case.
Think, like, in terms of Red Bull as a constructor, as a team, right? Like, obviously, you don't want to piss off Max because he's your ticket, your golden ticket. But the fact of the matter is, other teams are getting closer to Red Bull. And if you have consistently, Ferraris come in top 5, both McLarens come in top 5, like, that's a lot of points you're starting to give away with Sergio Perez. That's too many points, potentially, that you're starting to give away. And all of a sudden, oh shit, we're P2, P3 in the Constructors title. Now we're getting millions and millions of dollars less each year. That's a tough sell for me.
It is, but you've got me thinking here. For starters, I was thinking of Carlos Sainz's hot nanny, but also
he could be a good nanny. Maybe don't go to Williams. Become a hot nanny, Carlos. Right. There you
go. Right. But, Sergio helps for Red Bull on marketing, branding. He's going to do, like you said, he's going to be fairly safe. He's the safe bet. But, Max is the once-generation driver, I think. I mean, you think of the greats, the all-time greats. I mean, think of Schumacher. You don't think of Schumacher with Mercedes. You think of him with Ferrari. And it's iconic. And also, you talk to someone who knows F1 but isn't just, a savant, and you say, all those years when Schumacher was winning with Ferrari, did Ferrari win the Constructors? The answer is either they did or they did not. But really, it's sort of now somewhat irrelevant. Ferrari and Schumacher together are sort of iconic. So I don't know. I mean, maybe there is a good case for keeping Sergio there. He helps on keeping the car safe, not many crashes, no drama inside the paddock. Max knows he's this diva. It's all going to go his way. And if he can get the world championships, be, a goat like Schumacher, that could be. Although the way Christian Horner worded it, because he's still quite knowledgeable of everything going on at Racing Bulls, Yuki has a 2-year contract signed for 25-26, Sergio 25-26. And then Horner said, really these contracts are sort of like 1 and 1. Well, if you do good in 25, we'll bring you back for 26. I don't know, man. Maybe we'll get a swap. I doubt it, but it would be fun to see Yuki and Red Bull.
I agree. I think Yuki is typically one of the most fun drivers to watch. This season, really putting it together, well, sort of end of last season and this season, he's really been putting it together, driving really well. I think he's gained a lot of confidence from that. Had a bit of an unfortunate incident this weekend in this race, but on the whole, he's been doing a really good job. And I don't know, Yuki, for his stature, I find him quite bombastic. And I think that might upset the balance of Red Bull a little bit, that team. But I think it would be a lot of fun to see him sort of waltz in there and throw around that car. That would be fun.
That would be fun. I'd like to see Yuki at Red Bull. Now, his teammate Daniel Ricciardo. I saw a great quote. I think the woman is named Ash Vandelay. I think she focuses primarily on IndyCar, but she had this great quote that I'm not sure the non-American listeners would understand. And she called Daniel Ricciardo a system driver. Sort of like in American football, we've got a system quarterback. And that's someone they don't make mistakes. The quarterback in the football team, they don't make mistakes. They get the plays done, but the plays are sort of really, the quarterback is sort of kept on a tight leash. They don't have much demanded of them. Just focus on these few things. Don't make mistakes. You work well in that system. Get outside of that system, you're warming up the bench. And I had never heard of that for a driver, but I thought that was a great phrase, a system driver.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think I tend to agree, right? The way Daniel drives is very straightforward. He just kind of does what the car allows him to do, and that's about it. He's not getting every last bit out of the vehicle, maybe every time, like say a Max or a Lando currently, but he's also not, pushing so hard that he makes mistakes or puts the car on a wall or takes out other drivers. He's pretty clean. He's pretty safe. I think you can understand to some extent why he has a seat in F1, why team principals would look at Daniel Ricciardo and say, okay, that's like a safe bet. And that is indicative, to go back to the analogy, of a system quarterback in football, right? Like, you just want someone that can do the job and that's it. Everything else you can handle. But I don't know, there's so much that the driver can do to improve the overall position. I just think there has to be somebody out there that can do a better job in that car than Daniel Ricciardo.
And Liam Lawson is there.
It's true.
We been told you. We said Liam Lawson is better, and there is a very good chance he never drives an F1 again. We said that last year. I mean, give the man a chance, but I don't know. He may not, again, be without a seat in 2025, and he'll just be relegated to Indy. I mean, I hate to say that, but I mean, really, it's relegation. Going to Indy. I mean, you got Liam Lawson right there.
Somebody who in his, what he raced, five races in F1 last season, somebody who consistently beat Yuki Tsunoda, right? Like, that through several races, it wasn't a one-off. He did a very good job in that car. He proved that he was capable enough of being a Formula One driver, of holding a seat in F1. I think, it's a tough one to look at and say for certain that he should not be in F1, right?
Yeah, it's tough. But this is turning out to be a fun season. And next year, I mean, all these cars are bunching up and we're going to have so many driver moves. I mean, it's hard to think Zhou will be back. Maybe Bottas, maybe he goes to Williams. Although, I think it was Bottas Was it when Albon got hit by Sainz? I don't remember now, but I think it was Bottas who it was just unbelievable reaction to miss the car. I don't have to rewatch the race, but I think it was Bottas where there was a car out on track, and he just, just as the yellow flag was coming, I was like, wow, this is amazing. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe Haas, since Hulkenberg's going to Sauber Audi/Audi, and I think K-Mag, he's not harming the team, but he's not helping the team. I think there's going to be, 2025 is really going to be a very, very interesting year. And if Red Bull let's think about this. If Red Bull somehow manages to have the best car next year, if they do, it probably will be just by a hair. And they'll have a team of Max and Sergio. But look, Ferrari will have Charles and Lewis Hamilton. McLaren will have Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. I mean, these are good. Alonso will still be back with Aston.
I mean, Mercedes is going to be George Russell and presumably a top-tier driver. Who's to say? But, I mean, Mercedes kind of commands that, so you would expect that will be a very good driver pairing.
So many of the haters have just been saying, oh, F1's just going downhill, going down. I mean, no, F1's getting better. I mean, I heard Hyundai now is hoping and trying to see how they can get into F1, for a power unit. I mean, we could have, we have, Ferrari, Honda, Ford with Red Bull, Mercedes. We could have Hyundai. We'll have Audi. Andretti is still fighting to get in, bring in Cadillac. I mean, F1 has never been better,
Yeah, I think in terms of racing, in terms of overall, involvement from different stakeholders, I think it's just getting better and better every year. I think it's still kind of an exclusive, boys club mentality there in F1, but I think some of those walls are being broken down, and pretty soon it's going to be what we sort of want and would hope for in terms of, just so much money, but also so many different people, companies, power unit suppliers, all these different people are going to be involved. And I think it's going to make the sport better. It's going to make it more interesting. It's going to be more competitive. And ultimately, I think it's going to lead to better overall experiences in the sport and then sort of outside the sport as well, as a lot of that technology is going to find its way into road cars and things like that. I think F1 will be a big proponent of that. So
I agree. And no shame on me for forgetting Renault, because they've been garbage for a decade.
Their power units, frankly, have been the worst in F1 for a while.
Right. It has been. But yeah, this is amazing. And then they came out with more than a trial balloon, a general overview of the 2026 regulations. And the cars will be lighter, they'll be narrower. That's fun. They'll have hybrid fuel, which I know a lot of people care about fully. I almost hate saying some of the terms they use because I'm like, it's still fuel. We're still flying around the world racing cars. And a sort of a push to pass feature. Although I have my conspiracy theory on the push to pass feature in the proposed 2026 regulations is because how they've been coming down harsh on Alonso only. And Alonso is simply the very best defensive driver. And it's sort of like they're sort of dreaming up ways to prevent Alonso in particular, but just drivers in general from defending, which I'm like, defending is one of my favorite parts of the sport. Anyway, didn't mean to get off on that tangent, but yeah, I'm thinking the sport is really going
I
going
think that I sort of like your theory about that, but the what do they call it? Manual override to boost or something like that is what they call it in sort of the brief description of the regulations, which is, like you mentioned, seems pretty similar to IndyCar push to pass, which basically supplies a boosted electric power in order to make the car go faster. But I think in F1, that's sort of replacing the DRS system, because they're going to implement some like active aero elements that the drivers can choose which mode to be in depending on which part of the track they're in. So they're using this push to pass to replace the DRS, which is currently used to improve passing in F1. But what I like about IndyCar is the push to pass, right? You get a certain amount of time per race to use push to pass, like 150 seconds or something like that total throughout the race. But you can choose when you want to deploy it, anytime. But this F1 regulation makes it seem like only if you're within the 1 second of the leading car can you use this manual override, which is how DRS works currently. So all of that to say, I believe in your conspiracy theory that they're just messing with Alonso.
Across the line, that is where we predict the top 5 in the next race. The next race is in 2 weeks, Spain, when we begin our extended European tour in Barcelona. In fact, the city I love.
It's Barcelona, actually.
Barcelona, a city I love more than Montreal, except that they do not have poutine.
But they should.
They should. Everyone should. Yeah, everyone has to try poutine. Let's see. What is across the line again, Patrick? Oh, that's right. We predict the top 5. If we get it right, that's 1 point per driver. If we get them in the exact right spot, that's 3 points per driver, 3 points per driver. Once one of us chooses a driver, he's off the board and can't be taken. What were the results for this race, Patrick, and what are the overall results?
So results prior to this race, I was ahead 23-19. So I'll just read off the top 5 for this race was Verstappen, Norris, Russell, Hamilton, Piastri. Your picks, Norris, Perez, Sainz, Russell, Tsunoda. Kind of rough. You ended up with 2 points for Norris and Russell, but not in the exact spot.
Right. I had a Ferrari week.
My top 5 was Verstappen, Leclerc, Piastri, Hamilton, Alonso. So I had 7 points this week. 3 for Verstappen, 3 for Hamilton, 1 for Oscar. So that means after this week, I am leading 30 points to 21.
Oof. Yeah, bad week. Ferrari week for me. All right. So Barcelona. Last year was Barcelona. Max, Lewis, George. Close to what we had this week. Okay, who goes first?
I have first pick. So I got to take, I'm going to say, we're not going to have a Ferrari week like this week. I think we're going to have a Ferrari week like Monaco. I'm taking Carlos Sainz.
Ooh, Carlos. Ooh, you've left it open for me. I'm picking 1 and 2, and I'm picking George and Max.
Nice. Then I will take former Sainz teammate, Lando Norris, followed by Sergio Perez.
Wow. Carlos, Lando, Perez for you. I've got George, Max. Then I'm going to take Oscar and Charles Leclerc.
Nice. Then I'm going to take, I'll say, just misses out on the podium again, Lewis Hamilton. And in P5, another Spaniard, Fernando Alonso.
Nice. You've got both Spaniards. You've got Carlos, Lando, Sergio Perez, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso. I have George Russell, Max Verstappen, Oscar Piastri, Charles Leclerc, and I don't know who I want for my 5th spot. Let me think. Let's go with Yuki.
Nice. Good old Yuki.
Any crazy predictions, Patrick?
I cannot take credit for this crazy prediction. I actually don't know who to give credit to because I've read it briefly somewhere on the internet. But I thought it was a great prediction. We just got some information about the 2026 regulations, like we were mentioning. They're sort of moving away consistently from sort of more traditional like F1 designs and going into more sustainable. They're going, more electric, making the car smaller, all this stuff, all things that Max Verstappen has said he does not like. So my prediction is that Max leaves Formula One at the end of 2025.
Ooh, the problem with Max is I don't know what else he is.
Well,
He's only an
he
F1
can
driver.
be like a GT racing driver, race in Porsche Cup, do all these different things he can race in. I don't know. There's a lot of different series that I'm sure he would love to race in, but I just think
that would be huge.
Yeah, there's some pretty compelling, I think, arguments.
Reasons why. The only reason I think he wouldn't is because this is all he is. It's sort of like Alonso. Like Lewis likes his fashion. He likes to hang out with the celebrities. George likes to hang out, have fun. It just seems like Max and Alonso, this is all they are, so they're lifers. But that would be a good one because the rules are getting away from the old school F1 that Max loves. I don't have a crazy prediction per se, what we've sort of touched on already, but I do think that at least 2 drivers will be out before the end of the year. And their names are Logan Sargent and Daniel Ricciardo. It will not end well for either. All right. I want to thank you all for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. And we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
You just finished listening to Hard Compound, recorded in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and around the world.